Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. It's Thursday. Jimmy Akin's here. 2 hours of open forum. 888-318-7884, the number. Open forum for any question you've got. You don't have to be Catholic. It means open to everyone. And pretty much any question is okie doke. You can ask questions particularly about the Catholic faith, about the Bible or the Pope or the saints or the sacraments or something like that. You can ask questions of a more generally religious or philosophical nature. And Jimmy just is interested in everything. Jimmy has a podcast called Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, where if you've heard of it, he's probably covered it over there. So call with any question. 888-318-7884. Jimmy is senior apologist here at Catholic Answers, and the author of The Bible is a Catholic Book, which has got to be now one of the best-selling books of this apostolate's history, I would imagine. I mean, I don't have anything to back that up except hard, cold numbers, but I think it definitely is. Hey, Jimmy, how are you?
Hey, how you doing, Cy?
I'm very well, thank you. I think I'm right in saying that this is an apostolate.
It's certainly one of our best-selling books in recent history. I'd have to check the records to see if it's all time, but it is proved to be very popular.
We had a young man who came by here for a visit today, who works with Focus, and he said to me, "How long have you been here at Catholic Answers?" And I did in my head, it's exactly 3.5 years today. Exactly 3.5 years today. So, yeah, it's my 3.5 anniversary.
Congratulations.
Yeah. I'm gonna
For me, it is 27 years and 17 days.
Wow, that's almost exactly the same between the two of us. Wow, 27.
Within a couple orders of magnitude.
Right, right. Well, congratulations on your 27-year, 17-day anniversary, Jimmy.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, a bunch of people. I'm going to ask you in a little while. I'm going to make people wait. I'll ask you in a little while about what's on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World this week. But there are, in the meantime, people or a person on every single one of our lines. So shall we just jump right into it?
Yeah.
All right, let's start with Anonymous watching on YouTube. Anonymous, you know who you are, right? Are you there with us?
Hi.
Hi, Anonymous. Got a question for Jimmy Akin?
Yes. Strange hypothetical question, though, but it has to do with what I was asking. What if there was, with the notion of human progress in the near future, let's say there was a perfect secular, liberal, utopian society that was finally established where pain and suffering and death were just completely eliminated. And it was, totally irrational to believe in God from that point on, since everything was pretty much perfect, or there was no problems anymore. How would a Christian or a religious person survive in that environment?
Well, if it was a utopia where there was no pain or suffering, it would be pretty cool. Pain and suffering are no fun, at least in my experience. So that aspect of it would be actually quite fine. In terms of how would it square with the Christian faith, well, the Christian faith acknowledges that there are different phases in the history of the world, and some phases are beset by more problems than others. And if we were living in a utopia type situation, then, it would just be one of the better periods in world history. If I was living in such an era, I would say, well, it's great to be living in this time right now, but it's not going to last, because the faith reveals that before the end of the world, and there will be an end to history, before that happens, there will be an unleashing of the forces of evil. So even if it gets really good for a while, it's going to get bad again before the end. And so that's how I look at it.
Are you stunned, Anonymous? What do you think?
Well, that's very interesting. So it means it's sort of like the world's not going to always be perfect. There will be bad things that could come about. Eventually, especially prior to the end of time, there will be some degree of suffering, I take it.
Yes, but that doesn't mean that before we get to that point, things can't get really good. Now, in the 19th century, there was what's sometimes called the myth of progress, and myth in the sense of it being a powerfully motivating belief that people had that there was progress and everything was getting better. And in a lot of ways that was true. But then came World War I, and then came World War II, and then came the threat of atomic war, and then came 9/11. And so the myth of progress is also myth in another sense, that we're not, at least our recent experience hasn't been an unrelenting, drive towards better and better situations. There are ups and downs. In the future, we could have some big ups, but before the end, there will be a down.
Anonymous, thank you. Appreciate you getting us started on Open Forum. Jimmy Akin is our guest. Up next is Giovanni in Rhode Island, listening on the Catholic Answers Live app. Giovanni, thanks for downloading the app onto your phone. Your question for Jimmy.
Hello, fellas. I have a question about the veneration of the saints. I don't have the problem with the statues. I think Exodus showed, 2 examples of, it's okay to have statues and whatnot, but the veneration thing is often something that eludes me.
Okay, well, veneration is just a form of showing respect, and God doesn't have a problem with showing respect to people in conjunction with the amount of respect that is their due. In fact, we have exhortations in the New Testament to show people their proper respect. We owe one kind of respect to our parents. We owe another kind of respect to our kinsmen. We owe another kind of respect to our leaders in the church. We owe another kind of respect to our leaders in society. And we owe another kind of respect to God's friends, to the people who have followed him faithfully and who are with him in heaven. And how that respect gets expressed varies according to culture, but fundamentally veneration is a form of respect, and you want to give people their props.
Can I ask a follow-up, though?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
I think it's the reason I have such a hard time accepting this or trying to understand it is because I come from an anti-Catholic house, right? They believe that the Catholics these worship idols. I'm like, no, I don't think so. But whenever they mention they pray to the saints and they do all this extra stuff, I'm like, it's kind of hard for me to accept the Catholic worldview. If you could show me historical evidence of it or biblical, that'd be cool. Perhaps that'll set my mind at ease.
Evidence of what specifically?
To show venerations to the saints or Mary, right?
Okay.
That's what I'm looking for.
Okay, so there are a variety of things that one might look at. Now, the first one thing that you see in Scripture, now prior to the time of Jesus's death and resurrection, human saints, by and large, were not in heaven because it was his death and resurrection that allowed human saints to get into heaven in a regular way. There had been a few exceptions like Enoch and Elijah before that, but most human saints were waiting in a pleasant state, but not in the full glory of heaven until after the time of Jesus. So the individuals that were in heaven prior to the time of Jesus were angels. And they were the principal ones who populated heaven, and God would send them as messengers to do various things or as his agents to do various things in the world. And whenever people on earth encountered an angel and realized it was an angel, their first response was always awe, because angels are superior to human beings. As the scripture says, God made us a little lower than the angels. So angels are higher ranking and higher in rank than we are, and they're also more powerful than we are, which makes them a little intimidating. And so whenever you see humans encountering angels and realizing that it's an angel, the human starts to show a lot of respect and even fear. And that's why when angels show up, one of the first things they frequently say in Scripture is, "Don't be afraid." And they need to reassure humans, because humans are naturally afraid when they encounter something beyond our experience that's more powerful than we are and closer to God than we are, and so forth. But you will see humans doing things like bowing and paying them respects and things like that. You even see a tendency like this in the New Testament. You see it on the part of the Virgin Mary. When the angel Gabriel shows up to her, one of the first things Gabriel says is, "Don't be afraid." He says the same thing to Zechariah. And so we see the inhabitants of heaven already being shown respect even in Scripture. Then after the time of Jesus, as humans began to join in a regular way the population of heaven, you see Christians understanding that they should also be paid their appropriate respects. And so in the writings of the early church fathers, you have indications of, for example, asking the saints, the human saints in heaven, for their intercession, asking them to pray for us. We see that in inscriptions from the catacombs from the very earliest centuries. We also have early Christian writers talking about asking for their intercession. And of course, if someone's praying for you, you want to say thanks. You want to show your appreciation. And so you also have indications of a growing veneration and respect and awareness of the fact that we have brothers and sisters in heaven. They're part of God's family, and we want to show them the same respect that we show other people, and even more so because they have become what we need to be. They have become completely sanctified or sanctified. Here in this life, we still struggle with sin. We're imperfect. We're not what we should be. But the people who are with Jesus in heaven have become perfected by his grace. And so we owe them even more respect.
Giovanni, I have to go to a break. I'm going to say thank you very much for the call. I hope that was helpful to you. Jimmy,
I also wanted to mention I've got a book called The Fathers Know Best, which tracks the teachings of the early church fathers on different subjects, including the intercession of the saints. So I'd recommend that book to you. It's called The Fathers Know Best.
Giovanni, you mentioned your situation. I don't know if you'd like us to, but we'd be happy to send you a free copy of that book. I'll tell you what, just hang on the line. Marie can talk with you, and you can let her know if you're in a position where you'd be comfortable getting a free copy of Jimmy's book, The Fathers Know Best. Well, take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Open Forum with Jimmy Akin right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
It's all about the truth. Catholic Answers Live.
Hi, this is Cy. We've got two great episodes of Catholic Answers Focus this week. Monday, we did an interview with Father Hugh Barber about the Sacred Heart and its biblical roots, its medieval roots, and what it especially means to modern people. And then Wednesday, why do we have a magisterium? Does that fit with the Bible, that we need a magisterium, especially when St. John says that we only need the Holy Spirit to teach us? That's with Carlo Broussard. You can get Catholic Answers Focus at CatholicAnswersFocus.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
The Aquinas Writing Advantage program is part of Homeschool Connections' set of online courses for your Catholic homeschool. Homeschool Connections' website is homeschoolconnections.com.
Doctor, featuring Doctors Tom McGovern, Chris Stroud, and Andrew Mullally.
The number of people who are on government assistance expanded so much. Personally, I had patients in my office in tears saying, I never thought of myself as somebody on government assistance. I just bought a new car. I can afford a brand new car, but I'm still on Medicaid.
Doctor, Saturdays at 11 a.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin, our guest, and it's Open Forum, 888-31-TRUTH, the number. I want to encourage you before this deal goes away to see about getting the digital deal on Catholic Answers magazine. It really is a fine magazine. Tim Ryland does a great job on it here. I think Jimmy Akin, virtually every issue's got something in there, and lots of other great writers as well, some from within this building here and some who... from all around the world of Catholic apologetics and Catholic theology who contribute to the magazine. You can get 8 years a full 8 years worth of digital magazine issues for just $39.95 right now. 48 issues of Catholic Answers magazine for $39.95. Or you can, if you want to select a year, you can get that for less than $10 a year, a particular year you'd like to get the editions of the magazine for that year. Just visit the ebook and magazine sections at shop.catholic.com today and check out our new offerings there. Jimmy Akin's latest book, The Bible is a Catholic Book. Hey, I'm going to go to Russ in Indiana here, but before I go to Russ, Jimmy, what's up this tomorrow with Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World?
Oh, acupuncture.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Beginning in the 1970s here in the United States, acupuncture, which is a part of traditional Chinese medicine, became very popular. There are different explanations for how it's supposed to work, but there's also a question, does it actually work? So we're going to look into the history and the science of acupuncture and what it has to say about whether it works or not, and if it does, what would explain that? Oh,
fair enough. I sometimes people will say things like, well, in regard to things like acupuncture, well, it works, but it's just the placebo effect. So, that doesn't really work. But if it works, it works. Like even if it's the placebo effect.
Well, we talk about whether the placebo effect and other non-specific causes might be playing a role here.
Oh, fair enough. All right. Let's go to Russ in Indiana. Russ, your question for Jimmy.
Hi, Jimmy.
Hi,
I love your Mysterious World. I've listened to every episode so far, and I just finished reading The Bible as a Catholic Book, so I appreciate that.
Thank you, Russ.
In Jesus, my question is, in Jesus' time, they didn't have chapter and verse in their Bible, so how would they have referred to different passages in the Bible? I think maybe in Luke when they say Jesus found the part in Isaiah that says this, but I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
The way they do it when one writer, now if you're in the synagogue and you're reading from Isaiah, you just pick up the scroll and start reading. You don't say a reading from the 7th chapter of Isaiah or whatever, because they didn't have chapters back then. You just start reading it. But in terms of how a writer will refer, whether a biblical writer or someone who's not a biblical writer, but who's just writing about the Jewish scriptures, in terms of how they would describe the passage they're talking about, they would generally cite the author, assuming they remembered who the author was and they weren't just quoting from memory, but they'll cite who the author was, and sometimes they'll say, like, as Jeremiah says, and then they'll just start into the quote, because they don't have a way to further narrow it down to where Jeremiah says this. Or they will sometimes add a little bit and say something like, as Jeremiah says somewhere, which doesn't really tell you any more information, but it does indicate that it may not, you may have to search around a little bit to find it. If there's more than one book attributed to an author, or if there's more than one book that's part of a set, they did have books back then. A book, prior to the time of Christ, was almost always a scroll. And that meant that if you wanted to write something really long, you had to use multiple scrolls, because nobody would want a scroll hundreds of pages long. It would be far too unwieldy to roll through that. So there was a finite length, pretty short length, to how long a scroll could be. That's why the Gospels are the size they are. They basically would fill a scroll. And so if you wanted to write a series of books on a subject like the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses, originally that was 5 scrolls. And so you could identify the book, but not the chapter or verse within the book, because those didn't exist. But the books did. So you could say, as Moses says in Deuteronomy, for example, or if you're talking about another ancient work, like let's say Josephus's Antiquities of the Jews, which was 20 books long, it filled 20 scrolls. You could say, as Josephus says in the 16th book of his antiquities, blah, 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 blah. And so they could identify the book if it's a book that's part of a series, but they couldn't do chapter and verse. They just either start the quote or say, as he says somewhere.
How's that, Russ?
Oh, there is one extra thing they could do. If there was something famous in a particular part of the book, they might cite the famous thing that's in proximity to what they want to quote. For example, in Isaiah, what we call Isaiah 53, we have the story of the suffering servant, or the prophecy of the suffering servant. And it goes on for a while, so there's a lot of little bits you could quote. But because the passage of the suffering servant overall is famous, you could say, as Isaiah says in the passage about the suffering servant, and then you could quote whatever little bit of it you wanted to call attention to. So you could use a famous thing as kind of a peg to direct them to that passage, even if there was no way to assign a number to it at the time.
Okay, Russ?
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Jimmy, what about the Psalms? Was that all just one book with individual Psalms in it? Was it like a songbook or something? Or
Yes, and those are the only chapters that were original in the Bible, but you wouldn't necessarily have them numbered.
Okay. Yeah, because they kind of each have a title to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to Paul in Denver, Colorado. Oh, I hope that this is really, truly the question Paul wants to ask, because I want to know the answer too. Paul, you there with us?
Yes, I am. Thank you so much.
Well, happy to have you. What's your question for Jimmy?
Hey, Jimmy. Is it frowned upon in the Catholic Church for a Catholic to be a Grateful Dead fan?
Well, the Catholic Church has no teaching on the Grateful Dead, and therefore it is not a matter of church teaching. It's purely a matter of opinion. So I would imagine that Catholics who have a high opinion of the Grateful Dead would not look down on that. Catholics who have a low opinion of the Grateful Dead would look down on that. But it's like any other situation. You're going to have different fandoms who are fans of different things and who like different things. But in general, this isn't a matter of church teaching. It's just a matter of opinion and personal preference. Having said that, one wants to be a spiritually alert, critical consumer of any media that one is consuming. So whether it's the Grateful Dead or any other musical group or any movie or any book or any TV show, it's composed by fallen human beings. And from time to time, there are going to be problematic elements as a result of that fact. So there's going to be problematic elements in the Grateful Dead. There's going to be problematic elements in My Little Pony. So whatever the media you're consuming, you need to be a critical consumer who brings to bear the principles of the faith on that so that you can filter the problematic elements and appreciate what is good about it without approving of what's bad about it.
Paul, if I may, are you a Grateful Dead fan?
I am, and I feel much better about your comment there, because I have like over 20 Grateful Dead shirts in my closet.
Okay. I'm assuming some of them will be tie-dyed. Is that correct?
True Deadhead.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, then take heart. As Jimmy said, you got to be. You have some critical faculties at work there, but that's also true of the My Little Pony fans. So I'd like all of you people with 20 My Little Pony shirts in your closet to consider you have to be critical as well. Paul, thanks for the call. Appreciate it.
I actually know a channel on YouTube where a guy does critical analyses of My Little Pony episodes from a writing perspective. I've never watched one, but I see that he does them.
That's high culture right there. That tells you everything you need to know about American culture right now. Let us go to, you know what, I'm going to be a little selective about my question right now because there's one I want you to have more time with, Jimmy, in a minute. Let's go to Brian in Ohio, listening on the Catholic Answers Live app. Brian, thanks for downloading the app onto your phone, by the way. Your question for Jimmy.
Yes, thanks, guys, for taking my call. I have a question in regards to video games. I've heard Jimmy talk before in regards to magic, if it's in a video game, or playing or anything along those lines. Because if you aren't having the intention to do it, it's just fantasy. It's not a big deal. Well, in regards to a video game that my children wanted me to let them play again and kind of do as a family, they have gods in the video game. Now, all of us are well aware that these aren't real gods. But because of that, that was one of the reasons I didn't want to play it anymore, because occasionally you'd have to do a side quest where you do something for them, like you pick up something in one town and bring it to them somewhere else. So I wanted to know if that was a problem in playing the game.
Well, so one of the things that we want to be aware of now, by the way, which gods are we talking about? Are these like the Greek gods or the Norse gods or something?
They're just made up for this video game series.
So they're made
up
gods.
Not even related to those.
Okay. Well, St. Paul read Greek literature, and we know that St. Paul read Greek literature because he quotes from it. He quotes from various Greek poets and authors in his letters and in his speech to the Areopagus, and that shows us that he was willing and thus the legitimacy of exposing oneself to that material and processing it critically. There's a little bit more to say about that, so we'll pick it up on the other side of the break.
All right, we'll be right back with more Jimmy Akin on Open Forum today on Catholic Answers Live.
Catholic Answers. Our success depends on you.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
Who are the Jehovah's Witnesses, and what do they believe? How do you respond to their claims that God isn't a Trinity and Jesus isn't divine? What's the best way to evangelize Jehovah's Witnesses when they come knocking at the door? In 20 Answers, Jehovah's Witnesses, you'll find smart, solid answers to these questions and many more, giving you the knowledge you need to respond to friends, family, and missionaries who try to steer you away from the church and into Kingdom Hall. 20 Answers Jehovah's Witnesses is part of the 20 Answers series at Catholic Answers, offering hard facts, powerful arguments, and clear explanations of the most important topics facing the church and the world, all in a compact, easy-to-read package. Visit shop.catholic.com and take a look at this exciting new series from Catholic Answers Press.
Every Catholic has heard the challenge. How can you believe that? Don't you know the Bible says? It's a challenge we have to meet. If we can't reconcile apparent contradictions between Scripture and Catholic teaching, how can our faith survive? And if we can't answer our Protestant brothers and sisters, how will they ever come to embrace the fullness of the faith? In meeting the Protestant challenge, apologist Carlo Broussard gives you the knowledge and tools you need to answer 50 of the most common Bible-based objections to Catholicism. Be prepared to give an answer. Order your copy of Meeting the Protestant Challenge today by calling 844-239-4952, visiting shop.catholic.com, or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. On the line, Brian in Ohio. We're talking about a video game that involves gods and magic. And Jimmy, you were in the midst of an answer.
Yeah, so we know that St. Paul read Greek literature because he quotes from it. And that shows us, among other things, that it's in principle okay to read Greek literature. That meant that he read about the different Greek gods, for example, and so he would have known about the various conflicts and the various shenanigans that the Greek gods got up to. He would have had familiarity with Greek mythology, and that meant that he would have had this in his head. You know, whenever we read stories, we imagine what's going on in the story. At least we do if we have, unless we have a condition called aphantasia, which is where you don't have a mind's eye that you imagine what's happening. There are some people who don't have that ability to visualize the situations they're reading about. And so they have a different experience when reading a book than most people do, because most people have a mind's eye, and so we imagine the scenarios. So that's kind of like, watching a TV show. If you're St. Paul and you're reading about Greek mythology, you've got a little movie or TV show or video game like experience playing out in your head, where you're imagining, Apollo runs into Mount Olympus and asks Zeus to borrow the keys to the chariot or whatever. But you're imagining these things, and that's essentially like playing a video game. St. Paul also quite likely may have, and I can't prove this, but he may have even experienced Greek theater, because the Greeks would put on a lot of their literature in the form of plays. So you'd see plays that had gods in them. In fact, that's where we get the phrase Deus ex machina, which is the kind of twist ending at the end of a play where something magical happens to fix the main plot problem. In ancient Greek plays, what they would do is they would have an actor playing a god or a goddess who they would get onto the stage by use of a machine, like a winch. They'd lower them down onto the stage or something, and then the god would solve all the problems. And so that's where we got the phrase Deus ex machina, or the god from the machine. St. Paul, because he was a Roman citizen, he very well may have even gone and seen plays involving gods. But even if he didn't see plays, he did read Greek literature and have those scenarios in his mind. And so there's not, in principle, anything wrong with watching a TV show or playing a video game just because it involves an imaginary deity, as long as you understand it's imaginary. On the other hand, different people have different vulnerabilities, and some people, it's going to be spiritually bad for them if they do play those games or watch those shows. And so even though there's nothing intrinsically wrong with it, it could be wrong for different people, and it's up to you, Brian, as a parent, in consultation with your wife, to make the best decision for your own family, given your knowledge of your children, which, of course, you know them far better than I do, and whether this would pose a serious spiritual risk to them or not, that's for you and your wife to discern prayerfully.
Thank you, Brian. Lots of folks on the line. Going to keep moving. I hope that was helpful to you. Let's go to Connor in St. Petersburg, Florida, watching on YouTube Live. Hi, Connor. What's your question for Jimmy Akin?
Thanks for taking my call, first
Happy
of all. My question is, when were the four Gospels written, and then how do we know?
Okay, well, there are different opinions on this, and I do talk about them in my book, The Bible is a Catholic Book. Basically, virtually all scholars agree that the Gospels were written in the 1st century A.D., and there are a variety of evidences that scholars use to illustrate that. Everybody agrees that they were not written before the 1st century AD, because they refer to things that happened in the 1st century AD, like Jesus being executed during the reign of Pontius Pilate. Well, we know when Pilate was the governor of Judea. It was between AD 26 and 36. So if Jesus was executed within Pilate's reign, that gives us a kind of lower threshold from they couldn't have been written earlier than this, since they are talking about this. On the other hand, when we get into writings in the 2nd century, we find them quoting from the Gospels, and so that means they would be written before the 2nd century. In fact, we even have like a fragment of the Gospel of John that's it's dated different ways, but some people date it as early as AD 125. It's called the Rylands Papyrus. And so if we've got an actual fragment of the Gospel of John, which based on the way the Gospels relate is recognized as being the latest, well, if we have one from, say, 125 AD, it's probably not a copy of the original, so John's Gospel would have been written sometime before AD 125, and probably a few decades before AD 125, which would put it in the first century. And then if John's is the latest, then that would put the other Gospels in the first century as well. So the question is, when in the first century were the Gospels written? And here there are different opinions. The majority opinion would say that, and there are even variations within this, but the majority of scholars would say that Mark's Gospel was the first one written, and that it was likely written between AD 65 and 70. Or maybe just a few years after AD 70. Then Matthew and Luke were written between the 70s and the 80s, and John's Gospel was written in the 90s. And if that's the way it turns out, that's fine. That's very close to the time of Jesus. It's certainly close enough for living memory to still be there and for accurate information about Jesus to be recorded in the Gospels. And we have good reason to trust the evidence about Jesus in the Gospels. It's a different question than the one you're asking, though. Personally, I think the Gospels were written earlier. There is a different position among other scholars, and I favor that one. I think the Gospels were written earlier. I think that you can date the book of Acts, which is the sequel to Luke, to the year 60 AD, approximately. And since Acts is the sequel to Luke, I think you can date Luke to just before Acts. I think Luke was written about AD 59. I think they were both written during Paul's 2-year Roman captivity in AD 59 and 60. Well, Mark is earlier than Luke, but it can't be too much earlier because Mark is based on the preaching of Peter and didn't become Peter's traveling companion until maybe AD 50. So I think Mark was written sometime in the AD 50s. Call it AD 55. So you got Mark in 55, you got Luke in 59, Acts in 60. I think Matthew's Gospel was written in the AD 60s, probably around AD 63 or 64. I think John's Gospel, surprisingly, also was written in the AD 60s because if you read the Greek text, he refers to Peter dying in the future. So Peter is not dead yet in the Greek text of John, and we know Peter died around AD 65 or 66. So I think John was written shortly before Peter's death. So I think you've got Mark around AD 55, Luke AD 59, Acts AD 60, Matthew around 63, and John around 65. But if you want the details on that, check out my book, The Bible is a Catholic Book.
How is all that, Connor? Make sense to you?
Yeah, that does make sense. But can I ask one more question?
Yes, but before you do, I want to tell you something. Jimmy said you can find us all in his book, The Bible is a Catholic Book, and we do want to send you a free copy of it. So when we're done here, don't go anywhere. I'll put you on hold, and if you want, we'll get your address and we'll send you a free copy of The Bible is a Catholic Book. All right, follow-up question. Go ahead.
So what's the argument that it was written later? Like what are I know some people think that they were written later, but what's the evidence for that?
The evidence, frankly, is not very good. What people will cite, and it is, so the Jewish temple was destroyed in AD 70, and scholars will look at certain passages in the Gospels, particularly in what's called the Olivet Discourse, which is Jesus's prophecy from the Mount of Olives about the destruction of the temple. And they will go through the Olivet Discourse and try to find tiny little clues and say, ooh, this just ever so subtly suggests maybe it was written after AD 70. But when you read the Gospels as a whole, that's just not the way these passages read. When you had the evangelists writing, they were all about Jesus being a true prophet of God. And so they record it when one of Jesus's prophecies has been fulfilled. For example, Jesus says the Son of Man is going to be betrayed and he's going to be crucified and die and rise on the third day. And guess what the evangelists record? They record the Son of Man being betrayed and tried by Gentiles and crucified and died and rising from the dead. thus showing Jesus is a true prophet. Well, other than his own death and resurrection, Jesus' most famous prophecy, which is alluded to in all 4 of the Gospels, is the destruction of the temple. And he said it was going to happen within a generation, and it did. It happened in AD 70. So what would you expect the evangelists to do? You would expect them to say, and it happened just like Jesus said, if they're writing after AD 70. But they don't. They don't record that prophecy being fulfilled. And so to say we've got to rely on these subtle little maybe if kinda allusions really doesn't cut it. I always hate to psychologize why people adopt the positions they do. I rather prefer to look at the evidence for their positions. But this is really part of a historical trend where about 200 years ago, you had a very skeptical school of thought develop in Tübingen in Germany. And they wanted to say, some of them wanted to say the Gospels weren't written until the AD 200s or until the 2nd or even 3rd centuries. Some of them as late as the 200s. And scholarship has progressively pushed the dates earlier and earlier, but they're still fighting that tendency that got started with the Tübingen school. And so that's why a lot of scholars want to put them as late in the 1st century as possible, even if it means reading the evidence in kind of a wonky way. It's part of that historical trend.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you for those questions, Connor. Hang on. If you'd like to get that book, then Marie will get your address and we will send the book to you. Hey, right now we've got that free ebook, Did the Church Add Books to the Bible? You hear that accusation? Is it true? Was there a shorter version of the Bible and the church added books to them? Go to shop.catholic.com right now. Click on the banner at the bottom of the page to download your free ebook version of Did the Church Add Books to the Bible? That's shop.catholic.com.
Call now. Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
We have a big problem. Our culture is dying, and souls are in danger of being lost. The answer is conversion to Jesus Christ in His church. St. Paul Street Evangelization is a Catholic organization, and we have hundreds of teams spreading the good news throughout the country. But we need your help. The harvest is great, but the laborers are few. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
Father Robert Spitzer.
First of all, you will get a much deeper awareness of your faith, much deeper awareness of the evidence for your faith, explanations of tough theological issues, how science and reason and faith come together, and above all, a deeper awareness of how to practice your faith and how to live it.
Father Spitzer's Universe with Father Robert Spitzer. Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio.
You're just building tension, Nick. Are you building tension on purpose? Because it's Thursday and Jimmy's here. You know what I'm talking about, right? And are you just intentionally building? All right. Intentional tension. 888-31 Truth is our number here. Jimmy Akin is our guest. Jimmy is senior apologist here at Catholic Answers. We mentioned a couple times already, but he's the author most recently of a book called The Bible is a Catholic Book. He has other books, including, I think we might have mentioned The Fathers Know Best earlier. He wrote The Drama of Salvation. He wrote A Daily Defense, 365 Days plus one to Becoming a Better Apologist, all of which are available on our website, shop.catholic.com. Plus, you can go to jimmyakin.com, read what he wrote there, or you can just type in Jimmy Akin into the Google machine, and you will get all kinds of info on Jimmy. Tomorrow, the weekly episode will be out of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Up next, Yossi in Akron, California. Do I have that right? Watching on YouTube Live. Yossi, you there with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Your question for Jimmy, Yossi.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk with you guys.
Oh, it's nice to have you.
Okay. And my question is, I've recently started buying books from the Church Fathers, and what stuck out to me is, like, why is Saint Augustine given a prominent role in the Catholic Church compared to the other fathers? Because there are plenty of fathers to read, and I was just wondering why the Catholic Church mainly focuses on Saint Augustine.
Well, when you say the Catholic Church mainly focuses on St. Augustine, where do you see the Catholic Church doing this? I mean, are you
the doctor of the church?
Yeah, he's one of more than 30.
Doctor.
He is a doctor of the church. Yeah, but there's more than 30 doctors of the church. Now, St. Augustine is a popular church father. One of the reasons for that is he's very, very intelligent. Another is that he wrote an enormous amount that has survived. So we have more of his writings than just about anybody else. He just wrote a ton of books. And so between the fact that he's very intelligent and very prolific, he writes lots and lots that we still have, that's made him a popular figure among the church fathers, but there's by no means an exclusive emphasis on him. If you were to go through the Catechism of the Catholic Church, some editions of it, for example, will have indexes in the back of the quotations from different figures in the early church. And while you might find Augustine gets more, if you counted them up, you might find that Augustine gets more mentions than some early church fathers. He's not going to have the majority. The majority of the quotations are going to be a hodgepodge of quotations from all kinds of different church fathers, and even some writers who were not church fathers, but who did live in the early ages. Tertullian, because even though he's not a church father, he is a very valuable early Christian writer to know about. So the church doesn't have any kind of exclusive focus on Augustine. He is very highly respected. He is popular among the church fathers for the reasons I mentioned, but it's not an exclusive thing.
Okay, thanks for pointing that out to me. And also, what I noticed is, like in Christianity, there are two forms of, like there is a whole other group called Eastern Christians, and like I don't see them like quoting Augustine, or I don't see their respective churches like and doing any.
Go ahead. Well, one of the reasons that St. Augustine is not quoted as much in Eastern non-Catholic circles, now there are Eastern Catholics, but it's true that he's not quoted as much, especially among Eastern non-Catholics. There are a couple of reasons for that. One of them is St. Augustine wrote in Latin, and Eastern-speaking Christianity didn't use Latin a lot. Most Eastern-speaking theologians and bishops didn't know Latin, and so they would speak languages like Greek or Syriac or Slavonic or things like that, and they didn't have translations of Augustine's writings into their own languages frequently, and so they didn't historically quote him as much because he was just writing in a language they didn't have access to. There's also sometimes, and this is regrettable, but it's a human reality, there's also sometimes some friction between Eastern groups and Western groups, and consequently, people in the Eastern groups might say, oh, Augustine, he's that Latin guy from the West, and they might value his writings a little less than they otherwise might have if he was a fellow Easterner writing in Greek or Syriac or something like that.
Thank you, Yossi, very much for the call. Hope that was helpful to you. Our number, 888-318-7884. Up next, RJ in Myerstown, Pennsylvania, listening on Catholic.com. RJ, your question for Jimmy.
Hello, and thank you for taking my call. Before I actually get to the question, I would like to, if I could, I'd like to give you the scenario or the situation I'm in before I actually give the question, if that's okay.
Keep it family friendly.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. No, this is very, very family friendly.
Okay.
Our church, which I am Catholic my whole life, and I sincerely believe in everything the Catholic Church teaches. But every year, our parish has a parish festival, which is an extremely family-oriented event. And we recently started a beer garden. Now, I understand and I agree that there's nothing wrong with drinking beer. The problem, or the thing that I'm concerned about, is the atmosphere that we put our children and our neighbors into. And basically, I'm wondering if by having a beer garden, it possibly could be scandalous to our neighbors, our non-Catholic friends, and maybe saying that it's okay to publicly drink.
Jimmy?
So let me ask you a question, RJ. Is it wrong to drink?
No, absolutely not.
Okay. So is it wrong to drink in public?
No, it's not.
Okay. So this would be an example of people doing a behavior that's legitimate to do in public, and they're doing it in public. So we then have to say, well, what's the reaction of other people? Well, let's talk about adults first. Other adults some of them, teetotalers, might say, well, I don't approve of that. And they might get offended in the sense of being annoyed or angry about it. Well, you can't, that's not offense. That's not something that is automatically a problem. If you're doing something legitimate and somebody else gets mad about it, you don't want to encourage situations where that happens, and you might say, well, I'm going to refrain in this particular instance. But if you make a habit of that, of avoiding conflict at all costs and avoiding people feeling annoyed at all costs, you're gonna not actually serve God's kingdom well, because people are going to walk all over you, and you're going to be paralyzed, and you're going to be second guessing everything you do in terms of, could someone possibly get mad at this? So if there's a particular situation where someone's going to get so mad that there are going to be further problems, like, I don't know, they go on a shooting spree, well, then sure. Obviously, in that situation, you want to avoid the thing that's going to cause them to lash out in that way. There's another kind of taking offense, though, which is where someone gets led into sin. And there could be people who have particular temptations towards the abuse of alcohol, and they could see your parish having its beer garden, and they could fall into sin. But that's true of everything. People get tempted towards everything. And you can't, once again, shut down a legitimate activity just because some people have particular temptations. You want to pray for those people. You want to, if you know someone is in Alcoholics Anonymous or something, maybe you don't invite them to the parish festival. But you don't want to be paralyzed by what may happen due to other people's use of free will. Then we could look at the situation in terms of not are people going to be angry or fall into sin. We could look at it from the perspective of, are they being drawn to the gospel? Well, there are some people in the United States who are so opposed to the consumption of alcohol that it would push them away. And those people are a vast minority. There are not very many of those people. There are many more people in American society who have an image of religious people as a bunch of stuck-up blue noses who have no ability to have fun and just want to rain on everybody's parade, and who don't live in a human manner.
Like Nick.
And for those people to see Catholics doing something as human as having a beer, that would actually wake them up and say, hey, these Catholics are human beings too. They're not the rigid people I thought they were. And so actually, I think in an American context today, the net benefit of having a beer garden is it's going to wake up more people to, hey, Catholics aren't a bunch of rigid prudes like I thought, or not as much as I thought, as opposed to people who are going to be horrified and get their pearls in a twist about the fact Catholics are drinking beer. Then when it comes to children, what we want to do for children is set a good example. We want to show them responsible behavior, and as long as the beer garden is being run in a responsible way, you're modeling responsible behavior for them.
RJ, thank you. I'd suggest also maybe throw in some square dancing. That'll make it fun. Jimmy Akin is our guest. He calls square dancing. He's senior apologist here at Catholic Answers. The author of The Bible is a Catholic Book, and it is open forum. So whether you're Catholic or not, you are welcome to call 888-318-7884. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and it is open forum, and that always means that the lines stay pretty full. But today the lines, it's been 1 second, somebody hangs up and somebody else gets in. So let's work our way through those a bit. Let me see here. 888-318-7884 is the number, but you're going to have to squeeze in right when you hear that other call end. You're going to try to squeeze yourself in there. Jimmy, I don't know what else to do except just keep going to calls because there's a lot of folks on.
Okay.
All right, let's go to Redeema in Illinois. Do I have you with me, Redeema?
Hello.
Hello. How old are you, Redeema?
I am 8.
Well, it's very nice to have you. Do you have a question for Mr. Akin?
Yes, I do.
Okay, go ahead.
How do you know God is real?
I know God is real in several different ways. It would kind of be like asking how do you know God is real is a little bit like asking how do you know your mom and dad are real. In everyday life, you know about your mom and your dad a whole bunch of different ways. I mean, sometimes you see your mom and your dad. Sometimes you hear your mom and your dad, even if you aren't seeing them at the moment. Other times, somebody may tell you about your mom and your dad, even if they're not present. They may say, hey, your mom really wants you to come home right now. You better move it. So there are a bunch of different ways you can know about your mom and your dad. The same thing is true of God. There are a bunch of different ways of knowing that God is real. Sometimes we can know that God is real because people tell us about God who are trustworthy, like Jesus, for example. Jesus told us about his Father, who's God, and he said, I can predict the future. I'm going to be betrayed, and I'm going to be crucified, and I'm going to die, and then I'm going to rise again. And all of that happened. And when that happened, that meant, wow, Jesus really could predict the future. And if he can predict the future, he knows about things that are beyond what humans can see and hear, because we can't see and hear the future. We can imagine it, but we can't know it for sure. Well, Jesus knew it for sure, which means he knows about things that we can't see and hear, and that includes God. So since we have good evidence, Jesus knows things we can't see and hear, we can trust him when he tells us about things we can't see and hear, including God. Well, also I mentioned that you can know about your parents in other ways. You could, for example, even if you can't see your parents at the moment, you could figure out the fact that they're real from the effects they have in your house. Like, food shows up in the kitchen, and your bedroom maybe gets cleaned up even when you didn't clean it up. And so you can realize, hey, somebody's doing this. It's not me. Somebody is bringing food into the kitchen, and somebody is cleaning up my bedroom, and someone is maybe taking care of my pet even when I forgot to do that. And so you could figure out your parents exist based on the fact that you can see the effects of what your parents have done. And this is one of the main ways we know that God exists, because we can figure out that God exists based on the things that he's done, like creating the world. Why does the world exist? Why is there anything at all? Well, there needs to be an explanation for that. And you could say, well, there are certain laws of science that, like gravity and things that we can use to explain certain things about the world. But that only gets us so far, because then we have to ask, well, why is there gravity? And you can keep asking why. And lots of kids do ask why, but there needs to be some ultimate reason why for everything. There needs to be some reason for everything in the world. And that reason is what we call God. So there's a lot more that can be said about that, but those are a few of the ways that I know God is real. Jesus tells me, and I can trust him. And also, I can figure out that there must be a God based on looking at the things that God has done, like making the world. So there's something rather than nothing.
Redeema, that was a really good question. Are you happy?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you for that call. We really appreciate it. Let's go to Jason in Waco, Texas, listening on Guadalupe Radio. Hi, Jason. Your question for Jimmy.
Hey, thanks for taking my call.
Happy to.
So my wife and kids and I have been Catholic for less than a month.
Oh,
and so,
congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. So just had our first Feast of Corpus Christi, and so after Mass on Sunday, I was doing some reading about Eucharistic miracles. And I guess, so generally, I'm just curious about sort of some of the verification processes that the Church goes through, going all the way back to even, say, medieval Eucharistic miracles. But particularly, I'm thinking of someone who today would be very, very skeptical, and if I were to say, yeah, Eucharistic miracles still happening. Well, yeah, right. No, really, they do these medical examinations. Oh, yeah, right. That's probably all just made up. Is there a way to see any of these documents, to examine the things that have been said by the medical experts who are called in to look at those things, so that there would be maybe a little more sort of firsthand evidence for someone to look at to examine these claims?
In principle, this is doable. What you'd have to do is contact the individuals who are involved, which is typically going to be the local bishop. And so what you'd want to do is contact the local diocese and say, I'm investigating this particular Eucharistic miracle. Can you help me with the documentation that concerns it? And then they could do that. They might say, well, there's kind of a lot of it, and so you need to pay some fees for all the photocopying it's going to involve and the mail to ship it to you and everything. But in principle, that's doable. The major hurdle to that, there's really kind of two major hurdles. One of them is the language barrier, because these Eucharistic miracles, there aren't a lot of them in English-speaking countries, as far as I'm aware. There may be some, but I'm not aware of any, certainly not recent ones. And so that means you're going to need to be contacting people in Spanish or Italian or Tagalog or whatever the local language may be. And so that's one barrier to getting access to primary sources. Another barrier is just bureaucracy. Just good old-fashioned bureaucracy, because any case that's famous enough for you to have heard of it has probably been around for a while, because it takes a while for knowledge of these things to spread. And that means, when you contact the chancery, even if you write to the bishop, the bishop does not personally go to the archives and do the photocopying and mail it to you. He's going to assign that to somebody. And that means they're going to have to do a record search, and because it's not going to be fresh at the top of their heads and things like that. And it can take a while in a bureaucracy to find the right person and get the right person moving, and then they have to do that as part of their other workload. They can't just drop everything to do it right now. And so there are some practical challenges that one would need to meet in order to get access to primary source documents, but it's doable in principle. Because of the difficulties of getting access to primary source documents, though, most people will rely on secondary sources, that is, people who have written about this. And as long as you're relying on someone who's writing from a scholarly perspective rather than just a devotional perspective, that could be good enough for your purposes. Now, even if you get the primary sources, a hardcore skeptic's not going to be convinced. But he could be convinced that, well, the church isn't just blindly accepting these things. They are doing some testing. They are doing some careful evaluation, even if I'm not personally convinced by it. Well, you may be able to show him that same thing by letting him read accounts of a more scholarly nature, even if they're secondary sources. I can't think of a scholarly source on Eucharistic miracles off the top of my head, but I do know about some very well done books. There's one in particular by a doctor from Canada who has written about how the Holy See goes about analyzing medical miracles in its saint canonization process. So it's not Eucharistic miracles, they're mostly medical miracles. But she became familiar with this because she herself is a pathologist. And out of the blue one day, she was given some slides and told, can you give us your medical opinion about the difference in these slides? She did not know where it was coming from. She assumed, because her client was anonymous, she assumed it was for a court case. And they were keeping her blind to what was in the court case so that she couldn't be accused of bias in favor of one side or another. So she gave her opinion and said, there's no medical explanation for the difference in these two sets of pathology slides. She thought it was fraud. She didn't know it's not fraud. These are two sets of slides that are known to be taken from this one person before and after a medical miracle. She was being consulted without her knowledge on a medical miracle investigation for a saint canonization. And the Holy See did not ask about her religious beliefs. They didn't care that she was an atheist, which she was. They just wanted her medical opinion. So that's an illustration of how the Holy See is actually quite objective in how it deals with these things. It keeps people blind to what they're examining. It does not have you must be a Catholic to certify this test. They don't care about any of that. They just want, what does the science say? She later went to Rome for the canonization of the person whose cause she was consulted on, and she then got interested in the subject of how the church investigates these things. She wrote a whole book about it, and after the next break, I'll try to have the name of her book for you.
Jason, we got to take that break right now. So maybe you can just listen, and Jimmy will give out the name of the book when we come back. But we do have to take that break. It is open forum. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and we will be right back with more Catholic Answers Live right after this. Hi, this is Cy. We've got two great episodes of Catholic Answers Focus this week. Monday, we did an interview with Father Hugh Barber about the Sacred Heart and its biblical roots, its medieval roots, and what it especially means to modern people. And then Wednesday, why do we have a magisterium? Does that fit with the Bible, that we need a magisterium, especially when St. John says that we only need the Holy Spirit to teach us? That's with Carlo Broussard. You can get Catholic Answers Focus at CatholicAnswersFocus.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
The Aquinas Writing Advantage program is part of Homeschool Connections' set of online courses for your Catholic homeschool. Homeschool Connections' website is homeschoolconnections.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
There's all kinds of prayers. There's all kinds of ways of praying. There's all kinds of methods of praying. There's a Salesian method, and Francis de Sales and Ignatius of Loyola. There's Franciscan methods and Dominican methods, and you name it, we got it. But sometimes we depend on a method too much. St. Teresa said that prayer was conversation with God. Do you have a hard time conversing with people? No, I don't have a hard time. Well, that's how it is with God.
Jimmy Akin, our guest this hour on Catholic Answers Live. It is open forum, and the phones are full, and we're going to work really hard to get to everybody's question. Jimmy, you were going to mention a book for our caller, Jason in Waco.
Yeah, the book is called Medical Miracles. That's the main title. And then the subtitle is Doctors, Saints, and Healing in the Modern World. And it's the doctor who wrote it is Jacqueline Duffin. Her name is spelled a little unusually. Jacqueline is spelled Jacalyn. That's Jacalyn. And then Duffin is Duffin. So Jacqueline Duffin, author of Medical Miracles, Doctors, Saints, and Healing in the Modern World.
And Nick, we'll have it in the show notes? Yeah, so it'll be in the show notes for this show for anybody that wants to look it up.
I just put it there.
Thank you, Jimmy. All right, Omar in Tucson, Arizona, where I assume it's cool and comfortable today, watching on YouTube Live. Omar, are you there with us?
Hi, you guys hear me?
We can, yes. Your question for Jimmy.
Hi. So I have a question related to tattoos.
Okay, what's your
why is
question?
it so frowned upon inside the church? I mean, what's the official teaching? Because the more I look, the more I find nothing.
Yeah, well, you're right. The Catholic Church has no teaching on tattoos. None. So that's why you're not finding anything. In terms of why people may frown upon it, well, there are a couple of reasons. One is that until fairly recently, tattoos were viewed as kind of a low-class thing in American culture. So if you go back a generation or two, tattoos, if you had a tattoo, that was unusual, that was strange, and also the people who got tattoos frequently were not viewed particularly highly. I mean, like drunken sailors would get tattoos and so forth. That was kind of the stereotype of the person who would get a tattoo was a drunken sailor. And so as a result, there was a kind of looking down on tattoos. But that's changed dramatically on a cultural level here in America, to where younger people, they don't have those old stereotypes. Lots of younger people have tattoos. It's considered much more mainstream today than it used to be. But there's still a kind of generational thing going on, because there's some hangover, if I can put it that way. No pun on drunken sailors, but there's some hangover of the previous attitudes that are still out there in the culture. And so that's part of why. In other cultures, the attitude towards tattoos may be very different. In fact, in some Eastern Christian cultures, they'll actually have like a little tattoo of the cross. And it's considered a holy thing to have that. So tattoos have different cultural resonances. The other reason why some folks, and this isn't just true of Catholics, but of other Christians, will look down on tattoos is because in the Old Testament, there is a verse that talks about making marks on your body and that being forbidden. And that's commonly understood to be a reference of tattooing yourself. It's not, I'm not 100% convinced linguistically that that's what it is. It could be a different kind of mark, like a brand, which is, or a cut, or a scar, which is not the same thing as a tattoo. But this was a pagan custom. It was something that pagans did. And so to help keep the Jewish people culturally distinct from their pagan neighbors, they were forbidden to engage in a lot of practices that are fine in and of themselves, like eating pork, or, eating shellfish, or remaining uncircumcised. There were a bunch of things that are perfectly fine in themselves, but to make the Jewish people culturally distinct, they were not allowed to engage in those things. So they would distance themselves from the pagans and thus not be tempted to imitate pagan religion and pagan morality. Well, that's why in the Old Testament, there's a law saying don't put marks on yourself, because that was a pagan thing that pagans were doing. But there's nothing intrinsically wrong with this. And so since Christ came and has given us the Holy Spirit, we have the Holy Spirit working in our lives to help keep us faithful to the Christian faith and to Christian living. And so we're not obliged to remain culturally distinct from those around us in the same way. And that's why today Christians don't have to get circumcised, and Christians can eat pork, and Christians can eat rabbit, and various other things that were forbidden to the Jewish people to keep them separate from pagans. And in my view, the same thing is true of the tattoo command. As long as you're not interfering with your body's functioning, which tattoos don't, and as long as the moral content of whatever you want to have tattooed is morally acceptable, I mean, you're not glorifying Satan or something, well, then okay. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with it. But that's my view on it. As I said, the church doesn't have an official teaching, so someone could have a different opinion than mine, and that's legitimate for them to have a different opinion. And having said all that, put my cards on the table, I do not have any tattoos, so I don't have a dog in this game.
Omar, I want to see what you think, and see if you get a tattoo, if you'll be able to not glorify the devil in your tattoo.
Oh no, I actually don't like tattoos personally.
Oh.
But me being in the youth group, talking to other youth around the city, I mean, I don't know how I can preach something and not know the answer to it fully. The closest thing I find in the New Testament is saying your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And most people would be saying you don't want to, paint the temple. That's pretty much all I've gotten. Like, it's just people are really either really into it or really far from it.
Yeah, right. I think that's true.
My counsel, if you're trying to preach the gospel to people, is focus on the important things like Jesus, and don't sweat the small stuff that the church doesn't even have a teaching on and that people can legitimately have different opinions on. The important thing is bringing people to Jesus, not nitpicking their personal style based on debatable opinions.
Omar, thanks for the call. Jimmy has thus far, I'm going to give you 2 direct quotes from you today, Jimmy. The Catholic Church has no teaching on the Grateful Dead, and the Catholic Church has no teaching on tattoos. That's it. It feels like we've got a theme.
Both true.
Both true. I feel like a theme's developing. I wonder if we can get another one of those in before the end of the day. John in Boise, Idaho, you are next, listening on Salt and Light Radio. John, your question for Jimmy.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My question is regarding, thank you, sir. My question is regarding Revelation 6:10. And ever since I've read it, I've always been stunned kind of by the lack of humility. I don't know. I don't understand it. Why are the people who have been martyred, they're obviously at peace and they're in paradise. I don't see why they are so emphatic about being avenged for their blood being spilled. I mean,
okay. Yeah, I think that so you're referring to the passage in the book of Revelation where John on the island of Patmos is having a vision of heaven, and he sees the souls under the altar in heaven crying out to God for justice because they've been martyred. And they say, how long, O Lord, are we going to have to wait until you execute justice? And comforted, and they're told they're going to have to wait a while longer, but God will ultimately take care of this situation. Well, because heaven is fundamentally beyond our experience to imagine it, the book of Revelation uses a lot of symbolism and a lot of literary language to give us a sense of what heaven is like, but it's not more than a sense. He's not giving us the exact details, and it's going to be exactly like this, and it all matches up one-to-one. The language is meant to gesture at what heaven is like, but the realities of heaven far transcend what we're presently able to imagine. So it's not like when we get to the end of the world, the New Jerusalem will literally be a giant cube with streets of transparent gold. That's a symbol to help us understand certain things about mankind's final state, but the details are not meant to be taken literally. And I think that something similar is true when we're dealing with the emotional states ascribed to people in heaven. What we're told at the end of Revelation is that God will wipe away every tear because pain and suffering and all of the old things will have passed away. But those who are in heaven participate in that reality even now, so they don't suffer. So when we see someone in heaven seemingly suffering anguish about the fact that their death has not yet been avenged, that to me says, okay, this is a symbol. The person is not literally suffering in heaven. This is a symbol that's meant to communicate something to us, the audience. So then it becomes a question of, well, what might this be communicating? One thing it could be communicating is the fact that it's going to be a while before the persecution ends, but don't worry, it's in God's hands, and God will ultimately make everything right. I actually think that's the primary purpose of what this is saying it's really to assure us, the human reader, that even though the persecution is not going to end immediately, God will ultimately bring justice, and you can be comforted in the meantime. So I think that's the primary purpose. But there can be other dimensions too, like how those in heaven, even if they're not suffering as a result, they realize justice needs to be done. And so, they were killed unjustly, and they recognize that justice needs to be done, and they turn to God seeking that justice, which also shows us we can turn to God seeking justice. And so I think there are a number of different lessons that we can draw from this, but I don't think that the martyrs in heaven are literally in pain and anguish about the fact that the end of the world hasn't come yet.
And you can probably hear the music, John. We'll have to leave it right there. We'll take a quick break and be back with more Jimmy Akin on this open forum Thursday afternoon here at Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on, we'll be right back with more Catholic Answers Live.
Many Catholics ignore the Bible. They say they have the Church instead. But we should embrace sacred Scripture, not just as the revealed Word of God, but as a Catholic work, intimately connected with the Church from the earliest centuries. In The Bible is a Catholic Book, apologist Jimmy Akin shows how the Bible cannot exist apart from the Church, in its origins, in the truths it contains, in its careful preservation over the centuries. Scripture is inseparable from the Catholic faith. This is fitting, since both come from God for our salvation. If you're a Catholic who sometimes gets intimidated by the Bible is a Catholic book will help you better understand and take pride in this gift that God gave the world through the Church. After all, Catholics are the original Bible Christians. Order your copy of The Bible is a Catholic Book today by calling 1-844-239-4952, visiting shop.catholic.com, or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Why does everyone need to be saved? Does the Bible say we're saved by faith alone and not by works? What does the Catholic Church teach about heaven, hell, and purgatory? In 20 Answers Salvation, you'll find smart, solid answers to these questions and many more, laying out the beautiful story of how God calls us out of sin, justifies us, makes us holy, and leads us to everlasting life with Him. 20 Answers Salvation is part of the 20 Answers series from Catholic Answers, offering hard facts, powerful arguments, and clear explanations of the most important topics facing the Church and the world, all in a compact, easy-to-read package. Visit shop.catholic.com today and take a look at this exciting new series from Catholic Answers Press.
Yep. Actual dancing going on in the studio. Because that's groovy music right there. Groovy Music Thursday, it's like the 7th inning stretch of the Catholic Answers Live world. It's almost always Jimmy's here when we play it. Thanks, Nick, for playing it. Nick, also the drummer on that track. And then he just plays something else. He just... What was that, Nick? Are we going to start again? Thanks for playing it, Nick. Appreciate it. You always know it's open forum when you hear that. And usually Jimmy's here because it's Thursday, open forum. Our number here, by the way, 888-318-7884. The lines have been typed, but maybe you can get through. Open forum means anybody can call with any question and ask Jimmy Akin. Jacob in Massachusetts, watching on YouTube, is next. Hi, Jacob.
Hello, thank you for taking my call.
Very happy to, Jacob. What's your question for Jimmy?
So my question for Jimmy was, I was going to ask if he could touch on the significance of vain sayings, and specifically, because you'll hear a lot of people say, oh my God, and you also hear people say, like, substitute that for oh my gosh and oh my goodness. I was wondering if you could touch on the significance of using one over the other and what's okay and what's not okay.
This is a question that takes us into the realm of Catholic moral theology and also some biblical exegesis. My understanding so we always want to start with what's the literal sense of a text. And this goes back to one of the commandments, one of the 10 commandments, which is commonly translated into English as you shall not take the Lord's name in vain. Well, that's not contemporary English. We don't talk about taking someone's name in vain naturally. That's not normal English style today. So we kind of have to say, well, what did this mean in its original context? And one of the proposals is, basically, approach it from a slightly different angle. It's basically treating God's name as if it's not holy. Now, what that meant, the original context, was not the word God. That's the word El in Hebrew, or Elohim, to use one of its other forms. When it talks about God's name is not God. God's name in the Old Testament is Yahweh. And so when it says don't take the name of the Lord in vain, what it actually says in Hebrew is don't take the name of Yahweh in vain, or don't misuse the name Yahweh. And you could misuse God's name in a variety of different ways. One way of doing it would be by swearing an oath falsely and saying, oh, I swear before Yahweh that this is true, when in fact you know it's totally not true and you're lying. That would be one way of doing it. Another way of doing it would be to disrespect Yahweh's name in some way, and kind of like, oh, Yahweh, who's that God? Well, that would be disrespecting Yahweh and his name. So what's forbidden is lack of reverence or misuse of the name of Yahweh. That's literally what the principle involved here is, on the literal level of the text. But like the other 10 commandments, this one contains a principle that can be extended. And the principle to be extended from this is that we should display appropriate reverence to God in general, not just with respect to the name Yahweh, but also to God in general, and even to other people in general. That's a theme that's worked out in some of the later commandments. But we want to be appropriately reverent. Now, so how do we cash that out in terms of different statements, utterances that people have, like, oh my God, or oh my gosh, or oh my goodness? Well, it depends in part on how those statements are taken by people and how they're intended by people. If you are someone who is meaning to devalue God by any one of those, then you're doing something wrong, because you should not be devaluing God. Over time, Jewish people started extending one of the images that's used in the ancient literature is putting a fence around God's commandments, so you didn't even want to get close to them. So some Jews, to avoid misusing the name Yahweh, they would say, we're not even going to use the name Yahweh. We're going to say another word whenever we mean Yahweh. Like in Hebrew, you would say Adonai, which means my Lord, instead of saying Yahweh. And that was one way they would avoid misusing the name Yahweh. But that's really going beyond what was necessary. Because if you just substitute the word Adonai for Yahweh, you can still misuse the term Adonai. You could say, oh, I swear to Adonai this is true, when you're totally lying. And that would also be profaning God, even though you're not using the name Yahweh. So really, that's just kind of a linguistic workaround, but it doesn't really hold a lot of water. But it became customary as part of Jewish piety to do that. It's not mandatory by God's law that you do that, but a lot of Jews started doing that in order to try to stay away from anything that was even a potential violation of these. And that's why by New Testament times we have euphemisms like heaven when you mean God. So like you'll have Matthew talking about the kingdom of heaven, where the same passage in Mark or Luke says kingdom of God. So because heaven is associated with God, it gets used as a substitute. And so similarly, that's where we get, oh my goodness. Goodness is also associated with God, like heaven is associated with God. So saying, oh my goodness, is a substitute for saying, oh my God. And the motive is the same. It's like when Matthew's piety has Matthew saying kingdom of heaven but Mark or Luke's piety has no problem saying kingdom of God. It's the same kind of difference. So you'll have people say, oh my goodness, because their piety says, I don't want to say, oh my God. Well, does fundamentally something like, oh my God, disrespect God? No, for two reasons. The first reason is all language is dependent on how it's being used. It has the meaning that people give it. So in English, oh my God has a certain meaning, but that meaning is not fixed in stone. Language changes. If you go back to Old English and you read, let's say, the Canterbury Tales, which is actually Middle English, or you read Beowulf, which is Old English, you can't understand it, because the meaning of words has changed so much. So saying, oh my God, in Old English wouldn't really even sound like, oh my God, in modern English. And that shows us that it's not the sounds that are the problem, if there is a problem. It's the meaning. Well, as we mentioned, a lot of people don't mean anything bad when they say that. They don't even realize it, that they're invoking God. They may just say it reflexively. And as long as they're not intending to defame God or to abuse God's name, God knows that. He knows they're not trying to be disrespectful. In fact, they may be doing the opposite of being disrespectful. They may be being reverent. Because if you say, oh my God, help me in this situation, you're asking God for his help, and you're being reverent, and you're being sincere. If you see something horrible happen, like let's say an accident, and you say, oh my God, help those people, you're praying for the people who were in the accident, and you're invoking God and asking his help. So the phrase, oh my God, there is entirely reverent. And over time, what happened was people would say prayers like, oh my God, help those people. And it would be a prayer, but they would shorten it to just, oh my God. And it became kind of an expression of amazement. And some people thought in their piety, that's irreverent. I don't want to say that. And so they would come up with what's called a minced oath. A minced oath is where you take an oath like, oh my God, and you change it to, oh my gosh, or oh my goodness, or something like that. And that represents even a further attempt to avoid offending God. And so really, there's no single answer on all of this. It is possible to offend God using any of those phrases. It is also possible not to offend God using any one of those phrases. And so because of that, there's no single answer on this question, and you have to look at the heart. You have to look at what are people doing with their hearts? Are they intending to be irreverent to God? Are they intending to cause other people to be irreverent? If they are, that's wrong. If they're not, God understands that. And it is even possible to say, oh my God, help me, or oh my God, help those people, and be entirely reverent.
Jacob, we'll leave it there because we got to take a break. Thank you so much for the call. It's open forum. Jimmy Akin is our guest. I don't know if you've used the Bible Navigator. We've talked about it a couple times on the show, but I want to remind you about it again. It's a great new tool we've developed here at Catholic.com, and it's free. With the Bible Navigator, you can explore the scriptural basis for many Catholic beliefs that other Christians might consider controversial. You can also find answers to common objections to the church's interpretations of those Bible verses, drawing on other verses, historical context, and other things to explain the Catholic perspective. We hope this helps you and our brothers and sisters in Christ discover the biblical roots of Catholic beliefs in a much deeper way. Visit Catholic.com/Bible Navigator today to see what it's all about.
You're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
St. Paul's street evangelization isn't like other evangelism you might have seen on the streets. We don't yell, and we don't force anyone to pay attention to us. Instead, St. Paul's street evangelization is committed to presenting a positive, passionately Catholic presence to a world hungry for truth. For more information, or to start a chapter of your own, go to www.streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com. It's time to do our part.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
EWTN, Communicating the Faith.
And I wanted to tell you guys how great your show is because I listened to you guys for every day for the past 5.5 months. It's because of you guys that I came to the Catholic faith. Now I'm going to church on Sunday for the first time because I just got out yesterday from jail. And I got my mom to go too, and my girlfriend is also going with me. Wow. She's willing to give the Catholic faith a try.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live, open forum. Jimmy Akin, our guest, and about 1.3 million people on the phone. So we'll just keep working through it. Dominic in New York watching on YouTube Live. We have had a lot of callers from YouTube. Jimmy was pointing that out to me a little while ago. A lot of callers from YouTube. So hello to everybody on YouTube. Thanks for your calls today. Dominic in New York, your question for Jimmy.
Hi, everyone. Hope everyone's safe and healthy right now.
Thank you.
My question has to do with the New American Bible's translation of the Our Father, particularly in the last two lines. It reads, "Do not subject us to the final test, but deliver us from the evil one." So to me, it sounds like it's saying something different than "do not lead us into temptation, but deliver us from evil." It seems, to me at least, that final test refers to the final judgment. So my question in regards to this is, why is this different from what we usually say? And also, could we say this version instead of the traditional when we say it by ourselves?
Oh, absolutely. You can say any version. You can say any prayer you want that's reverent in private. And so since this is a legitimate translation of what Matthew says, it's not the only translation, but it is a legitimate translation. You could say this in private. You could also read Luke's version of the Lord's Prayer in private, which is even more different than this. In terms of why do you have this difference in translation? It's because there are a couple of terms that can be rendered more than one way in English. It's single term in Greek means both temptation and testing. And so "don't lead us into temptation" is one legitimate interpretation of what this says, but so is "don't put us to the test," or "don't lead us into a time of testing," or any number of variations like that. So that's why that line can come out differently in one translation compared to another. The other one has to do with the Greek article. In linguistics, articles are little short words that indicate a degree of definiteness. In English, we have two. They're called the definite article and the indefinite article. In the definite article in English is the. So if I talk about the apple, you know I'm talking about one specific apple. The indefinite article is a or an in English. And so if I'm talking about an apple, well, you know that I have some kind of apple in mind, but you don't know definitely which one because I didn't say the apple. I'm just talking about some apple when I say, would you like an apple? I'm not asking you, do you want this particular apple? And so Greek is a little bit different than English in terms of the way it uses articles. In Greek, they do not have an equivalent of an or a. They don't have the indefinite article. They do have the definite article. They do have the equivalent of the. But here's the thing. They use it differently than we do. They use it a lot. They use it it's hard to think of a good expression of how much they use it, but they use it way more than we do. They'll, for example, put it in front of personal names. So you'll be reading in the Greek New Testament and it will say, "The Jesus went to the Peter and said this," or the God rained down his showers from the heavens on the John, or something like that. So they use it a lot and differently than we do. And that means when you've got the definite article in Greek, you have to make a decision of, is it being used the way we use the word the or not? Well, it so happens in the Greek version of Matthew's Lord's Prayer, what Jesus says literally is, deliver us from the evil. Well, sometimes they just throw in the for emphasis, and they don't mean a specific thing. And so you could, as a translator, say, I think this is one of those places where we should leave it out of the English translation. And so you just say, deliver us from evil. Any evil. He's not being definite about the kind of evil. He's just using it according to Greek rules that are different than English rules. On the other hand, you could say, no, he does mean some specific evil thing, the evil. And the normal way to translate it in this case would be the evil one, meaning the devil. So like if you hear someone talking about the righteous, it means the righteous one or the righteous ones. In the same way, if you hear someone talk about the evil, it would mean the evil ones or the evil one in the singular. And here it's singular in Greek. So it would mean deliver us from the evil one or the devil if Matthew is intending the definite article to really be definite in this case. So that's why there's more than one legitimate English translation of this, and you'll find different renderings in different translations because different translators make different choices. We don't say this version in church because we've been saying it the other way for hundreds of years in English, and it would be really disturbing to try to reorient everybody over what's actually an optional different translation. So we stick in church, in the liturgy, with saying it the traditional English way, but there's nothing wrong with saying it the other way in private.
Dominic, can leave it there. Got a lot of people to try to get to before the top of the hour. I hope that's helpful to you. Let's go to Francis in Alberta, Canada, also watching on YouTube Live. Hi, Francis. Your question?
Hey, Francis here. My question is just about transubstantiation. Some context to that. My partner and I, we were I'm Catholic, she's not, and we're listening to debates between a Protestant and a Catholic. And this fellow brought up, the Catholic side quoted a bunch of church fathers for proof of our belief in the true presence. Mm-hmm. And then this fellow brought up a fact, or just a thought that really got me thinking, and he said, transubstantiation as a term wasn't brought out until around I forget the year, but 1200, let's say, or whatever it came out.
That was when it was defined, but yes.
That was when it was defined. And then the Protestant was mentioning there's no evidence of, reverence to the point where not wanting to even drop a crumb on the floor before it was defined. So he figures that the true presence kind of got amplified after that time, and it was never...
So you want to know, is that true?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not. So anybody can make an assertion about, well, there's no evidence for this or that, but in fact, if you have people saying, oh, guess what, this is really Christ's body and blood for reals, they're going to care about whether it falls to the floor or not. So all of the different things that the church fathers, the Catholic apologists quoted, themselves constitute indirect evidence. Now, what they don't do is show directly that this is the case, but we can be more direct, because if you look, for example, at the catechetical lectures of Cyril of Jerusalem, when he's instructing his catechumens or his mystagogues on how to receive communion, he says, make a throne with your two hands to receive Jesus your King. So if you're making a throne with your hands to receive a king, so you put one hand on top of the other to receive the Eucharist reverently, clearly you're being reverent towards it, and clearly you're going to care if it falls on the floor. You don't want the king to fall on the floor. You don't want to, ditch him off his throne. So So clearly we have evidence there for reverence for the Eucharist. If you're making a throne for a king who also happens to be God, you're clearly being reverent. What there is an absence of, as far as I'm aware, is evidence of people who were Orthodox Christians in the early church saying, oh yeah, I totally don't care if it falls on the ground. The non-Catholic debater may be asserting that they wouldn't care, but where's his evidence? You know, if he wants to assert something like that, given all the evidence I have for the real presence as a belief in the early church and for showing reverence when you receive the Eucharist, where's his evidence that nobody cared? Let's have some Orthodox Christian writers of the first centuries who say, oh yeah, it's totally fine if it falls on the floor, no big deal. He's just making an assertion. It's not backed up by evidence. He won't be able to produce any, I'm pretty sure.
Francis, thanks. As I said, I got to keep moving. Let's go to Camila in right somewhere here in California. Camila, are you there with us?
Yes. Hello.
Hello, Camila. How old are you?
I'm 12.
Well, thank you for your call. Your question, please, for Mr. Akin.
So my aunt is a Protestant, and she always brings up a quote saying that Jesus is our only mediator to God. Do you have something to combat that?
Well, I don't need to combat it because it's true. There is a sense in which Jesus is our only mediator with God. A mediator is a person who works between two other persons or groups of people to help, for example, make peace between them. And so it's kind of like a negotiator. Well, Jesus is uniquely our mediator in two senses. In the first sense, he's the only God-man. He's the only person who's both God and man. So he stands between God and man in a unique way. He also is the mediator of the new covenant. That's why he says when he institutes the Eucharist, he says, this is the new covenant in my blood. And he's the only mediator of the new covenant. It's only through his blood that the new covenant was made. So absolutely, Jesus is our only mediator in those two senses. But does that mean, and this is usually when people who are non-Catholics bring up verse. By the way, the verse is in 1 Timothy. If you want to look it up, where Paul says Jesus is our only mediator. When they bring up this verse, they often want to say, well, therefore we shouldn't ask angels and saints to pray for us because that would somehow interfere with Jesus as our only mediator. My answer to that, there's a couple of them, but one of them is keep reading, because Paul goes on to say in that very same passage, Jesus is our only mediator, and so I want men everywhere to raise up holy hands to God and pray for other people. So Paul doesn't say, oh, no one should ever pray for anybody else because Jesus is our mediator, and don't ask anybody to pray for you because Jesus is our only mediator. He doesn't say those things. He says the opposite. He encourages people to pray for other people, and he himself even asks in various places for people to pray for him. So it's clearly fine to pray for other people. It's clearly fine to ask other people to pray for you. That doesn't interfere with Jesus being our mediator at all. In fact, it pleases Jesus. Also, Jesus isn't the only mediator for everybody. If you read Paul's letter to the Galatians, Paul talks about how the Jewish law, the Old Testament, was put into effect through a mediator. And the person he's thinking of there is Moses. So just like Moses was the mediator that stood between God and the Israelites and helped bring in the old covenant, so Jesus is the one who stands between God and us and brought about the new covenant. But that doesn't mean Jesus is the only mediator in every circumstance. Moses was also a mediator. But the fundamental point, since this tends to be about prayer, is it's okay to pray for other people and to ask other people to pray for you, just like Paul indicates, both in 1 Timothy and in other passages.
Camila, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for the call. But we are at the end of the show, so we'll have to let you go. Jimmy Akin has been our guest. His podcast, Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, will drop with a new episode on acupuncture tomorrow. Jimmy, thanks very much.
That's
really,
right.
I enjoyed the 2 hours.
Me too. Thanks, Si.
Tomorrow, Jerry Usher's back. We got Jerry and his current radio partner over on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network, Debbie Georgiani. We're going to talk about how a Catholic approaches times of crisis with them. And then we got Tim Staples closing out the work week with the kids show. So if you're a kid or you got a kid, second hour for you tomorrow right here on Catholic Answers Live.